You already know something is wrong. You've known for a while. Maybe it was something they said offhandedly, something that slipped out before they could catch it. Maybe it was a pattern you kept dismissing because you didn't want it to mean what it meant. But here you are, searching, trying to understand why someone who said they loved you also made you feel like the loneliest person in the room. That feeling you can't shake, that gap between what they said and what you actually felt, that's not confusion. That's clarity you haven't let yourself accept yet. And this video is going to help you do exactly that. There is a specific kind of pain that comes from loving an avoidant. It doesn't announce itself loudly. It creeps. It settles into your chest slowly over weeks and months, until one day you realize you've been holding your breath in this relationship for so long, you've forgotten what it feels like to exhale. You've been managing their moods, managing the distance, managing your own needs so carefully that you stopped asking for things altogether, not because you stopped wanting them, but because asking started to feel dangerous, like it would tip something over. And the most disorienting part, they weren't always cold. That's the thing nobody talks about enough. Avoidance can be incredibly warm, incredibly present. In the beginning, they can make you feel more seen than anyone ever has. That pull, that magnetism, it's real. You didn't imagine it. What you felt was genuine, and what they felt was genuine too, in its own complicated way. But somewhere along the line, something shifted. The warmth became inconsistent. The presence became selective. And you started doing this thing where you were constantly trying to get back to that first version of them. The one who looked at you like you were the answer to something, that version didn't disappear by accident. Understanding why it disappeared, and more importantly, understanding what they've actually told you along the way, that's where everything changes. Here's what most people get wrong about avoidance. They think avoidant behavior is about not caring. They think the withdrawal, the deflection, the emotional unavailability, they think all of that means absence of feeling. It doesn't. In many cases, it means the opposite. Avoidants often feel deeply, uncomfortably deeply. And the entire architecture of their personality has been built around one central project, making sure those feelings never get the chance to overwhelm them or expose them to loss. Think about what that does to a relationship. You're showing up open, vulnerable, wanting closeness. And they're standing on the other side of a wall they built so long ago they don't even remember constructing it. They just know the wall feels safe. And you feel like a threat, not because of who you are, but because of what you represent. The possibility of needing someone, of being known, of having something to lose. That's a profound thing to sit with. Because it reframes everything, it means the times they pulled away weren't necessarily reflections of your worth. They were reflections of their fear. Fear dressed up as independence. Fear dressed up as needing space. Fear dressed up as, I'm just not that emotional of a person. But underneath every one of those statements, underneath every behavior that left you confused, there was communication happening. There was something being said, and the question is whether you were able to hear it for what it actually was. When an avoidant tells you they need space, most people hear rejection. And the pain makes sense. It lands like rejection. It feels like rejection. Your nervous system doesn't know the difference between someone choosing distance and someone telling you that you're not enough. Both feel like abandonment. Both activate the same wound. But here's what's actually being communicated. When an avoidant says they need space, they are telling you that closeness feels suffocating to them right now. They are telling you that the intimacy you're building has crossed some internal threshold they don't fully understand themselves. They are telling you in the only language available to them that they are scared, not of you specifically, of what you both are becoming. The tragedy is that the anxious partner, the one who loves them and can't understand the withdrawal, tends to respond to that request for space by pursuing harder, by reaching more, by doing everything that feels natural when you're afraid of losing someone. And that pursuit confirms every fear the avoidant has about relationships. That if they let someone in, that person will consume them. That closeness means loss of self. And so they pull further, and you pursue more. And the cycle becomes the relationship. You have been living inside that cycle. You might not have had words for it until now, but your body knew. Your body has been keeping score of every time you reached and they retreated, every time you asked for more and felt the temperature drop, every time you softened and they stiffened. That exhaustion you feel isn't weakness, it's the cost of being the only one paddling. Now let's talk about the things they actually say, the specific phrases, because avoidants communicate their entire inner world through language that sounds, on the surface, like normal conversation. like reasonable requests, like neutral observations. But if you know how to listen, if you know what's underneath the words, it's one of the most transparent forms of communication you'll ever encounter. The first thing an avoidant tells you that you need to believe, completely, without trying to negotiate it away, is when they tell you who they are in the very beginning. This sounds almost too simple, but think about it. Think about early conversations. Think about the things they said about themselves, their past, their relationships, their needs. Did they say things like, "I'm not good at this"? Did they say, "I tend to push people away"? Did they say, "I don't know if I'm capable of what you're looking for"? Did they laugh nervously and call themselves emotionally unavailable like it was a personality quirk rather than a warning? Because here's what was happening in those moments. They were telling you the truth, not performatively, not to seem mysterious. They were being genuinely honest in the way that avoidants sometimes are in the very beginning, before the defenses fully activate, before they've assessed how much you might eventually ask of them. In that early window, something real slips through. And what slips through is their actual self-perception, their actual history, their actual limitations as they understand them. And most people, most loving, optimistic, hopeful people, hear those disclosures and think, but not with me. They think they just haven't had the right person. They think I can show them what love is supposed to feel like. And that instinct comes from a beautiful place. It really does. The desire to be someone's exception is one of the most human things there is. But it's also one of the most quietly destructive. Because what you were actually doing in that moment was deciding not to believe them. And relationships that start with you deciding not to believe someone's account of themselves are relationships that are built on a blueprint you drew alone. The second thing an avoidant tells you that deserves your full attention and your full belief is when they tell you that a previous relationship ended because of them. Not the specific details, not the story they've constructed around it, but that core admission that they know on some level that they were the one who created the distance, who withdrew, who couldn't fully commit, who left before they could be left. That admission is enormous. It's not self-flagellation. It's not fishing for reassurance. When an avoidant says something like, "I know I have a pattern of doing this," or "I always seem to end up alone in the end," they are describing a lived experience of themselves that they have not yet found a way to change. And you, being who you are, probably responded to that with compassion. You probably held space for it. You probably said something kind about how everyone has patterns and patterns can be broken. And all of that is true. Patterns can be broken, but they are broken through sustained conscious inner work, not through finding a new relationship, not through finding you. The relationship doesn't do the healing. The person does, and if they haven't done that work, the pattern doesn't disappear. It just has a new stage. That's not a judgment of them. It genuinely isn't. Avoidant attachment develops in childhood. It is an adaptation. It was, at one point, a survival strategy, a way of protecting a young nervous system from inconsistent or emotionally unavailable caregiving. The child who learned that needing people leads to disappointment became the adult who prides themselves on not needing anyone. The child who learned that expressing emotion leads to rejection or withdrawal became the adult who intellectualizes feelings rather than experiencing them. You are not in a relationship with someone who is broken. You are in a relationship with someone whose earliest experiences of love taught them that love is not safe, and they are running that program on you, whether they mean to or not. There is something called the deactivating strategy, and once you understand it, you will start to see it everywhere in your history with this person. A deactivating strategy is any thought, behavior, or communication that an avoidant uses, often unconsciously, to reduce their emotional investment in a relationship. To create just enough distance to stop the closeness from feeling threatening. It shows up in so many ways. Sometimes it's physical, the sudden need to be alone, the trips, the working late, the finding reasons not to stay the night. Sometimes it's cognitive. They start noticing everything that's wrong with you, everything that's incompatible, every reason this probably won't work long term. Not because those things are necessarily true, but because their internal alarm system has been triggered and it's generating exit strategies. And sometimes it's verbal. They say things that land strangely, things that you replay later trying to understand. They say things like, "I just don't think I'm built for relationships." They say things like, "I think you deserve someone who can give you more than I can." They say things like, "I care about you, but I don't want to hurt you." And every single one of those statements in that moment sounds like a door being gently closed. And it is. But what's important, what you need to understand down to your bones, is that those statements are not performances. They are not manipulation, though they can feel like it. They are genuine communications from a person who is experiencing genuine internal conflict and does not have the tools to resolve it without creating distance. When an avoidant tells you they don't want to hurt you, believe them. Not in the way you've been believing them, with a silent asterisk, with the hope that it means they'll try harder. Believe them literally. They do not want to hurt you. And they also cannot currently give you what you need. Both of those things are true simultaneously. And that dual truth is one of the most painful realities you can sit inside of. Because what do you do with that? What do you do when someone loves you in the ways they are capable of, but is incapable of loving you in the ways you need? That's not a simple question. It doesn't have a clean answer. But it starts with stopping the project of translating what they say into what you hope they mean. You have been translating. Constantly. Every time they said something that indicated limitation, you found a more optimistic interpretation. Every time they communicated their ceiling, you heard it as a temporary flaw. And the translation project is exhausting. It requires you to be perpetually engaged in a kind of emotional labor that they are not doing. They are telling you who they are. You are busy rewriting the manuscript. The intimacy you've been chasing with this person, that feeling of being truly met, truly known, truly held, that is a legitimate need. It is not too much. It is not neediness in the pejorative sense. It is a fundamental human requirement, and your longing for it is not a character flaw. The problem is not that you want too much. The problem is that you've been trying to get a specific need met from a specific source that has been consistently, honestly, sometimes painfully telling you it cannot provide it. And there's something important in that, because if you slow down long enough to really hear what they've been saying, all of it, the words and the silences and the withdrawals and the half-commitments, you'll find that they have never actually lied to you. Avoidants, as a rule, don't tend to lie about who they are. They tell the truth. They just tell it in the most minimized, deflected, casually delivered way possible. And love, specifically the kind of love you feel, the kind that is warm and searching and hopeful, love makes you an unreliable interpreter of those truths. This is the part that requires the most honesty from you. Because it's easy to frame all of this as something happening to you. And in many ways, something is happening to you. Real pain, real loss, real confusion. But there is also a question worth sitting with. Why did you stay inside the uncertainty? Why did their ambiguity become a pull rather than a signal? This isn't about blame. This is about understanding yourself with the same clarity you're now trying to apply to them. Because the push and pull of an avoidant relationship doesn't just affect anxiously attached people. It pulls in anyone who has their own unresolved relationship with love and safety. The intermittent warmth, the moments of closeness followed by retreat, that pattern activates something old in people. It recreates the feeling of having to earn love, of love being conditional, of safety being something that could be taken away at any moment. And if that pattern feels familiar to you, not just frustrating, but somehow magnetic, that's worth your attention. That pull you felt toward them, even through the confusion, even through the hurt, even through the moments where everything in you knew something was wrong, that pull has a history. And that history is worth understanding. Not as a punishment, as a map. Because ultimately, this isn't just a video about avoidance. It's a video about what you need. What you've been looking for. What you deserve to find, not in someone who is telling you in every possible way that they cannot give it to you, but in a relationship where the love doesn't require translation, where you don't have to manage the temperature, where you can exhale. That version of love exists. And the first step toward it is learning to believe people when they tell you who they are, especially when everything in you wants to believe there's someone else. There is a moment, and you probably remember it exactly, where something they said stopped you cold. Not because it was cruel, not because it was a fight, but because it was so honest, so unguarded, that it cut right through everything. And instead of letting it land, you moved past it. You kept going. You told yourself it didn't mean what it meant. That moment was a door, and you walked around it. This part is about what was behind that door. By now you understand the architecture. You understand that avoidant behavior is not indifference wearing a mask, it's fear wearing one. You understand the cycle, the deactivating strategies, the way their early life wrote a program that now runs automatically in the background of every relationship they enter. You have context, and context is valuable. But context without application is just interesting information. So now it's time to go deeper into the specific things they communicate, the ones that are easy to rationalize away, the ones that deserve your full, unflinching attention. Because here's the thing about avoidance that makes this particularly disorienting. They are often highly intelligent people, emotionally articulate in certain ways, capable of extraordinary self-awareness in conversation. They can describe their patterns with almost clinical precision, and yet completely unable to interrupt those patterns in real time. There is a gap between their insight and their behavior that can feel almost maddening when you're on the receiving end of it. They can tell you exactly why they do what they do, and then do it anyway. And you're left standing there thinking, if you know, why can't you stop? That gap is not a performance. It is not calculated. It is one of the most genuine expressions of psychological limitation you will ever witness in another person. Knowing something intellectually and integrating it emotionally are two completely different processes. One lives in the mind. The other has to move through the body, through old grief, through every experience that made the wall necessary in the first place. That journey takes time and intention that no relationship, no matter how loving, can shortcut. So when they tell you, I know I do this, I know I pull away, I know it's not fair to you, believe them completely, because they are not asking you to fix it. They are not asking you to be patient enough for it to resolve on its own. They are giving you a status report. They are saying, this is where I currently am. And the loving, desperate part of you heard that as, this is where I am right now, but I'm working towards something different. But that second half, the working towards something different, they never actually said that. You added it. Because you needed it to be there. This is one of the most common ways the translation project operates. An avoidant gives you a current, honest, accurate description of their inner world, and you receive it as a temporary condition rather than a persistent one. You receive it as a problem that love and time will naturally solve. And so you stay, and you wait, and occasionally the warmth returns and it feels like evidence that you were right to wait. But what you're actually experiencing in those warm moments is not progress. It's the natural oscillation of an avoidant attachment style. Closeness, retreat, closeness, retreat. The warmth is real, the retreat is also real. Neither one cancels the other out. Let's talk about what happens in their body when intimacy increases. Because this is something that is almost never discussed, and it explains so much of what you've experienced without explanation. For someone with avoidant attachment, emotional closeness is not just uncomfortable. It is physiologically activating in a way that mimics threat. Their nervous system, shaped by early experiences where closeness led to disappointment or emotional unavailability from caregivers, has learned to treat intimacy the same way it treats danger, not metaphorically, literally. The same stress response that activates when you're physically threatened can activate in an avoidant when someone gets emotionally close to them. So what you experienced as them pulling away after a beautiful moment together, after a night where everything felt right, after a conversation that went somewhere real and vulnerable, that was their nervous system firing an alarm. That was a biological response to something that felt, on a deep unconscious level, like it was going to cost them something. Safety. Autonomy. The carefully maintained distance between who they are and who they let anyone else see. And then they said something. Some version of, I think I need some time to myself, or I've been feeling a little overwhelmed lately, or the more devastating version, nothing. Just a cooling, a gradual lowering of the temperature that you felt before you could name it. And you adapted. Because you always adapted. Because somewhere in your own history you learned that love requires adaptation. That the way to keep someone is to need less, ask less, be less. You shrank, and it still wasn't enough. When an avoidant tells you they feel overwhelmed, that word overwhelmed is doing an enormous amount of work. It is a word that sounds situational, like it's about work stress or family pressure or something external and temporary. And sometimes it is those things. But in the context of your relationship, when that word appears after closeness, after vulnerability, after a moment where the two of you were genuinely connected, overwhelmed means something very specific. It means the intimacy register has exceeded what they can currently hold without triggering their defense system. It means you got too close. It means the wall is going back up. Believe that. Don't try to solve it. Don't offer to give them more space while simultaneously making yourself more available for when they're ready. Don't perform distance in the hope that it will make them want to close the gap. Just believe the word. Overwhelmed. They told you something real. The relationship, the closeness, the you of it all, it overwhelmed them. And a person who is consistently overwhelmed by intimacy with you is not someone who is on the verge of a breakthrough. They are someone who is living at the very edge of their current emotional capacity. and you cannot love someone into a larger capacity. You can only love them where they are. Now here's where it gets more complex. Because avoidants don't just communicate through what they say, they communicate profoundly through what they don't say, through the silences, through the things they consistently avoid, through the subjects that somehow never get addressed no matter how many times you circle back to them. Have you noticed that certain conversations seem to dissolve? That you can raise something important, something about the future, about where this is going, about how you've been feeling, and somehow by the end of the conversation nothing has actually been addressed? The topic got softened or reframed or intellectualized until all the emotional urgency drained out of it, and you walked away feeling vaguely gaslit, though nothing overtly dismissive was said. You just somehow ended up in a different conversation than the one you started. That is avoidant communication at its most sophisticated. The redirection, the subtle shift from emotional territory to intellectual territory. The ability to engage with the concept of your feelings without actually sitting inside the feeling with you. They will discuss attachment theory. They will acknowledge your perspective. They will use all the right language. And somehow, none of it will touch you. None of it will feel like contact. Because it isn't. It's management. It's the emotional equivalent of a very well-constructed barrier that looks, from a distance, like a bridge. When someone consistently redirects intimacy, when vulnerability keeps getting met with intellectualization, when your emotional needs keep getting reframed as communication issues or timing issues or external stress, they are telling you something. They are telling you that they cannot go where you are asking them to go. And that is information. Painful, important, clarifying information. The silence itself is a statement. When an avoidant goes quiet, truly quiet, in that particular way that feels different from normal introversion or tiredness, they are communicating something they do not have the language or the willingness to say directly. The silence is not emptiness, it is full. It is full of everything they are not saying. The ambivalence, the fear, the part of them that wants to be close, and the part that is running the other direction simultaneously. You have probably sat in that silence and felt completely alone while being in the same room as someone who claimed to care about you. That is one of the most specific lonelinesses available to a human being. To be physically present with someone and emotionally unreachable from them, to reach across the space between you and find nothing solid to hold. That experience has a cost. It accumulates, and it starts to teach you that your needs are the problem, that your desire for connection is too heavy, that you are, fundamentally, too much. You are not too much. Let that land. The silence was not a verdict on your worth. It was a demonstration of their limit. Those are completely different things, and it matters enormously that you understand the difference, not as a consolation, but as a fact. There is another category of communication that avoidants use that is perhaps the most destabilizing of all, and that is the mixed signal delivered with complete sincerity. This is not manipulation in the conventional sense. This is not someone who knows exactly what they're doing and is deliberately keeping you confused. This is someone who is genuinely experiencing contradictory internal states and expressing both of them, not sequentially but simultaneously. And the result is that you are receiving information that cannot be logically reconciled. They say, "I love you," and they mean it. They also say, "I don't know if I can do this," and they mean that too. They reach for you in moments of tenderness, and they disappear in moments of pressure. They tell you they can't imagine their life without you, and also behave in ways that suggest they're already practicing for it. Both are true. The love is real, the limitation is also real, and no amount of hoping or waiting or adjusting will make those two truths resolve into a single coherent answer. This is perhaps the cruelest feature of loving an avoidant. Not that they don't care, but that they do, and it still isn't enough to override the fear. Because the fear came first. The fear was wired in long before you arrived, and the love, as genuine as it is operating inside a system that was built to neutralize it. So what do you do when you love someone whose love for you is real but insufficient? What do you do when you've heard the truth so many times that it's starting to finally stick? Because there's a particular grief that comes with this realization. It's not the clean grief of being with someone who didn't care. It's murkier than that. It's the grief of losing something that was genuinely good in parts. The grief of loving someone who, under different circumstances, with different history, different healing, might have been able to meet you fully. That grief deserves space. It deserves to be taken seriously rather than rushed through. Because when you try to skip the grief, when you try to intellectualize your way out of it, or replace it too quickly, it doesn't disappear. It just goes underground, and underground grief has a way of shaping future choices in ways you can't see clearly. Sit with what was real. The warmth was real. The connection was real. The love was real. And also, the limitation was real. The communication was real. The things they told you, again and again, in words and silences, and distance and deflection, all of that was real too. And you were allowed to hold the beauty of what it was, while also being honest about what it wasn't. Those two things can coexist without one cancelling the other. Here is something that doesn't get said enough in conversations about avoidant relationships. The person who stays, the one who keeps trying, who keeps adjusting, who keeps finding ways to make the relationship work, despite the signals, that person is not simply naive. They are not simply in denial. They are often someone with a profound capacity for love. Someone who believes at a deep level in the possibility of people. Someone whose own attachment history has made them fluent in the language of trying, of working harder when love feels uncertain, of equating effort with devotion. That capacity is not a flaw. It is one of the most beautiful things about you. But it becomes a liability when it's pointed at someone who is not in the process of becoming available. When the effort and the hope and the staying are being absorbed by a dynamic that does not have the structural capacity to become what you need it to be. A river doesn't stop being a river because you want it to be a lake. You can stand at the bank and describe the lake it could become. You can love the river with everything you have, and it will still keep moving in the direction it was always going to move. The moment you start to believe what they've been telling you, really believe it, not as a temporary obstacle but as the current truth of who they are, something shifts. It doesn't feel good, not at first. It feels like loss. It feels like the bottom dropping out of something. Because the hope has been part of the structure. The hope has been holding things up. And when the hope becomes less certain, everything feels unstable. But underneath the instability is something solid. Underneath the grief is the beginning of clarity. And clarity, even when it's painful, is infinitely more livable than the particular madness of loving someone while simultaneously trying to decode them. Of wanting someone while also needing them to be different from who they are. Of hoping so hard that you've stopped actually seeing. When you begin to believe them, you begin to see them. And when you begin to see them clearly without the filter of who you need them to be, you also begin, slowly, to see yourself, what you need, what you've been denying yourself in the process of accommodating their limits. What kind of love you actually deserve. Not the love that arrives in fragments, not the love that keeps you guessing, not the love that makes you feel like a burden for having ordinary human needs. The love that doesn't require you to manage it. The love that doesn't have a ceiling just above where you need it to reach. The love that sees you coming and opens the door, not because it has no fears of its own, but because it chooses you anyway. That is what's waiting on the other side of finally believing them. There is something nobody prepares you for. Not the articles, not the well-meaning friends, not even the most accurate explanation of attachment theory. Nobody prepares you for the moment you realize that understanding something completely does not make it hurt any less. You can know every single thing about why this happened. You can trace the psychology back to its roots. You can see the pattern with perfect clarity. And still wake up at 3 a.m. reaching for someone who already told you, in every way they knew how, that they couldn't stay. That's where you are right now. And this part is for that exact place. Understanding avoidant attachment is one thing. Extracting yourself from the emotional grip of it, from the hope, from the history, from the version of them that lives rent-free in the softest part of your mind, that is an entirely different undertaking. And it is the one that actually changes your life. Because the real question was never just, why do they do this? The real question, the one underneath all the searching and the analyzing and the replaying, is what do I do now? Who am I in the aftermath of loving someone who couldn't fully love me back? And how do I stop choosing this? Those are not small questions. They are the questions that reorganize a person. Let's talk about what happens to your nervous system after an extended period inside an avoidant relationship. Because the psychological impact doesn't end when the relationship ends or when the distance becomes undeniable. The impact lives in you. It changes the way you read situations, the way you interpret silence, the way you respond to warmth. You have been trained, not deliberately, not maliciously, but trained nonetheless, by an environment of inconsistency. Intermittent reinforcement is one of the most powerful psychological forces available. It is more binding than consistent reward. When warmth and withdrawal alternate unpredictably, the brain doesn't conclude that the source is unreliable. It concludes that the reward is rare and therefore precious. It becomes hypervigilant, scanning constantly for signs of warmth, interpreting neutral behavior as potential withdrawal, amplifying every small gesture because every small gesture has had to carry enormous weight. You started reading into things not because you are anxious by nature, but because the environment demanded it. Because in this particular relationship, the small things were the only things. The crumbs had to function as meals. And now, even outside the relationship or standing at its edge, that hypervigilance is still running. You are still scanning, still interpreting, still trying to locate safety in someone else's behavior rather than in your own ground. That is not a character flaw, that is a conditioned response. And like all conditioned responses, it can be unconditioned, but only if you understand what created it. Here is what they told you that you need to believe most of all. More than any specific phrase, more than any single moment of honesty. What they told you through the entire duration of what you shared is that their internal world takes priority over the relationship. Not because they are selfish in a conscious, calculated way, but because their survival strategy, the one built in childhood, the one that kept them emotionally safe when safety was not guaranteed, that strategy does not make room for someone else's needs without experiencing it as a threat. Every time your needs made them retreat, they were telling you that. Every time a request for more closeness was met with distance, they were showing you the hierarchy. Not the hierarchy they wanted. Not the hierarchy they would choose if they were operating from a fully integrated, healed place. The hierarchy that runs automatically. The one that says, when intimacy becomes threatening, protect yourself first. Create distance. Manage the level of connection so it never reaches the point where losing it would be devastating. Because that's the core of it. The avoidant doesn't just fear closeness. They fear the loss of closeness. They fear loving something so much that its absence would destroy them. And so they maintain a careful, exhausting emotional distance that keeps them in the relationship, but never fully in it. Never fully exposed. Never fully available to be devastated. And you felt that. You felt the managed quality of it. The sense that there was always a small part of them observing from a distance. Never fully landing. Never fully arriving. You were in a relationship with someone who was perpetually keeping one foot near the exit. Not because they wanted to leave, but because knowing the exit was there was the only way they could stay. This is the part where you need to stop making their fear your project, because somewhere in the course of loving them, you absorbed their fear as a problem you were responsible for solving. You started to believe that if you could just be consistent enough, patient enough, understanding enough, secure enough, if you could just demonstrate convincingly that you were safe, that you wouldn't hurt them, that love with you would be different from whatever love had been before, that the fear would eventually relax, that the wall would come down, that they would finally let you in all the way. That project consumed you. It is still consuming you. And it will continue to consume you for as long as you remain inside the belief that their healing is something you can facilitate through loving them correctly. You cannot love someone into security. Security is an inside job. It is built through internal work, through therapy, through the slow, uncomfortable process of revisiting old wounds with new tools. It cannot be built through a relationship, especially not through a relationship with someone whose love, however genuine, has also been a source of chronic low-grade pain. The relationship is not the safe container for their healing. The relationship is the thing that's activating their wound. That is not your fault, but it is your reality, and accepting that reality fully, without softening it, is the beginning of releasing a responsibility that was never yours to carry. Let's talk about what you've lost. Not just them, not just the relationship, what you've actually lost over the course of this. Because there is a particular kind of self-abandonment that happens inside an avoidant dynamic, and it deserves to be named clearly. You lost access to your own needs for a period of time. Not overnight. Gradually. You started editing yourself, started presenting a version of yourself that was carefully calibrated not to trigger their withdrawal. You became fluent in a second language, the language of being low maintenance, of not needing too much, of being the kind of partner who could handle ambiguity with grace. And you performed that so well, for so long, that you may have started to believe it yourself. Started to believe that you didn't actually need what you needed. But the body doesn't lie. The loneliness you felt in their presence, that specific particular loneliness of being unseen by someone who was looking right at you, that was your body telling you the truth your mind was trying to manage. The ache you felt after the moments of closeness ended, that was your system registering loss in real time. The way you kept returning to certain conversations in your head, turning them over, trying to find the version of them that meant something more hopeful, that was not obsession. That was your psyche trying to process an experience that hadn't been given the space to be fully felt. Give it that space now. Let it be what it was, not romanticized, not minimized. Let the loneliness have been loneliness. Let the confusion have been confusion. Let the love have been real, and also let the limitation have been real. That combination, loving something genuinely while also being genuinely unable to receive what you needed from it, is not a contradiction. It is the full, complicated truth of what you lived. Now, and this is important, this is where you turn toward yourself with the same devotion you turn toward them. Because everything you did in that relationship, all of that attentiveness, all of that emotional labor, all of that trying and hoping and interpreting and adjusting, that capacity is yours. It did not belong to the relationship. It was never theirs. It is a feature of who you are, and it is extraordinary. The ability to hold space for someone's complexity, to stay present through difficulty, to believe in someone's capacity for growth, those are not naive qualities, they are rare ones. But they have been pointed outward for so long that you may have forgotten they can be pointed inward. That you can hold space for your own complexity. That you can stay present with your own difficulty. That you can believe in your own capacity for growth with the same fierce, patient conviction you extended to someone who could not fully receive it. What would it look like to become the recipient of your own devotion? What would it look like to attend to your own needs with the same careful attention you gave to reading their moods? To offer yourself the same grace you offered them when they fell short? To believe in your own becoming the way you believed in theirs? That is not a rhetorical question. It is the actual work. The unglamorous, daily, deeply necessary work of reorienting, of learning to locate safety inside yourself rather than in someone else's consistency, of building an internal foundation that doesn't shift every time someone else withdraws. There is a version of you on the other side of this that is not harder, not more guarded, not someone who has decided that vulnerability is dangerous and closeness is a trap. That version, the armored version, is not healing. It's just a different kind of avoidance. And you have seen up close what that costs a person. You don't want that. The version of you on the other side of this is someone who has learned discernment. Someone who can feel the warmth of another person without immediately handing them the keys to their sense of self. Someone who can hear, "I'm not good at this," and believe it the first time, not with coldness, but with clarity. Someone who understands that love and compatibility are not the same thing, that chemistry and capacity are not the same thing, that potential and presence are not the same thing. Those distinctions will change every relationship you enter from this point forward. Not because you will become suspicious or withholding, but because you will no longer need someone else's love to confirm your worth. And when your worth is no longer on the table, when it is no longer something that can be granted or withdrawn by another person's behavior, you stop being available for dynamics that require you to earn it. The avoidant in your life told you something else too. Something they may not have said in words, but communicated unmistakably through the shape of the relationship. They told you what they needed from you. And what they needed was for you to hold yourself together while they held themselves apart. To be stable while they were inconsistent. To be warm while they were cool. To be present while they practiced absence. And you did it. For longer than you should have needed to. You held it together, and that required an enormous amount of you. It required you to suppress the parts of yourself that needed reciprocity, that needed reassurance, that needed to be met halfway. Those parts didn't disappear. They went quiet. They learned that there was no point in speaking up. They contracted. Part of your work now is letting those parts expand again, letting yourself want what you want without apologizing for it, letting yourself need what you need without bracing for the withdrawal that need used to trigger. Learning to speak in your full voice again, not the edited, careful, calibrated voice you developed to keep the peace, but the actual one, the one that knows what it wants, the one that says, "This isn't enough for me," without collapsing under the weight of that admission. That voice is still there. It never left. It was just waiting for an environment where it was safe to use it. One of the last things worth naming, and perhaps the most quietly liberating, is this. The avoidant who couldn't fully show up for you is not a villain in your story. They are someone who is suffering inside a system they didn't choose and haven't yet found a way out of. Their limitation is not malice. Their withdrawal is not a verdict on your lovability. Their inability to meet you is not evidence that you are unmeetable. Somewhere, right now, they are likely doing what avoidants do after intimacy ends or retreats. They are feeling the relief of distance alongside the ache of loss. Because the deactivating strategy works. It does reduce the overwhelm, it does create the space their nervous system was screaming for. But it also creates grief. Avoidants grieve too. They just tend to do it alone, quietly, in a way that looks from the outside like they're fine. They are rarely fine. They are just very practiced at the performance of fine. That doesn't mean you should go back. That doesn't mean their grief is your responsibility. It means you can release the story where you were not enough. You were enough. You were, in many ways, more than enough. So much more than enough that it frightened them. Your capacity for love, your willingness to stay, your patience with their process, all of that was not wasted. It was generosity. Extraordinary generosity extended to someone who was not yet in a position to fully receive it. Receive it yourself now. That generosity. Turn it around. Point it at the person who has been quietly waiting for you to notice them through all of this. The person who shrank so that someone else could feel spacious. The person who translated and adapted and hoped and held on. That person deserves the relationship you were trying to build. The consistency. The warmth that doesn't disappear after closeness. The love that doesn't come with a ceiling. The presence that doesn't have an exit strategy built into it. You know what that love looks like. You were trying to give it to someone the entire time. Which means you are entirely capable of recognizing it when it finally arrives from a direction you weren't expecting. From someone who has done their work, who can hold their own fear without handing it to you, who meets your vulnerability with presence instead of retreat. But first, before any of that, you have to believe them when they tell you who they are. All of them. The ones who showed you their limits and the one who has been showing you their strength this whole time, quietly, without recognition. That one is you. And it's time you started believing them too.